If you're defending this position and the attacker knows to do this, you know that you're playing someone who has also studied this position. A naive defender might try to give check there, but then the rook just hides in the shadow of the queen, and again you'll notice that there's a great deal of difficulty in getting the rook reconnected with the king. Can't go here. It gets immediately forked here from this square. It gets immediately forked here from this square. It gets immediately forked here from this square. That pretty much leaves here. But in that case, the attacker gives check here from the diagonal next to the diagonal that the rook is standing on. And in other parts of the database, we've already talked about how dangerous that is. Certainly there's no more harassment defense. In fact, the defender is just trying to stay alive. So at this point, what a good defender will do is go here. This is another thing the attacker just has to memorize. The right thing to do is to set up a discovered check. That way, any attempt to check from here, and the king just walks forward, again, harassment is over, and the rook is actually vulnerable to going lost to a fork. Now, if you're playing a computer, it's always going to respond by bringing the rook here, which is kind of boring of it. And now what happens is both sides enter a forced line. If either one deviates, if the attacker deviates, the attacker loses a lot of moves toward the 50 move rule. If the defender deviates, there's usually a quick crush. Walk toward the rook. Defender goes here. Queen checks from this location. Defender walks straight back toward the rook. Check from here. Walk straight toward the rook. Skewer the rook. And now the king can go either to g8 or h7. Doesn't matter which one. But as you can see, the harassment defense is over and the position has mutated into a corner defense. That's covered elsewhere in the database. The main thing is you've broken the harassment. If either player deviates from this sequence, they lose a lot quicker. So let's go back here. That's how the computer plays this position. But what I'm going to suggest is that if you're playing a human opponent, you probably want to do this. Now it's about 2 moves quicker to mate. But the whole point is that an unprepared attacker will be sorely tempted to respond with the discovered check that she or he just set up. In which case, you maintain opposition, and all of a sudden, the queen doesn't have these really dangerous checks here. In fact, the attacker has just lost 10 moves toward the 50 move rule, and if they fall for this trick, there's a good chance that you already have a draw in hand. If you're the attacker and the defender plays this very tricky option, you need to remember that you do a queen check. Now it can be either from there or it can be from down here on d2. It doesn't matter which one. They both effectively prevent the defender from gaining time. Now from here, the king has to stay away from potential forking squares, stay on a color opposite to that of the rook, walk away from it on the same line. We've got that. Potentially you can go here. Now what we've got is just a distant defense. White's managed to get the queen onto the same color as the rook. A lot of potential forking squares here, like there, like there. So So now the defender just has to give way, start moving this way. And you've seen this in the database under the topic of distant defenses. Now the queen has control of this checking square, so it's possible for the king to start advancing and closing the circle. So, from the key position, this is what you're trying to achieve. The first approach, the queen achieves this position with check, with tempo, and at this point the attacker needs to remember, run away with the king. That's the only good defensive move. I don't think anyone needs to be told why you don't go to king e4. And then set up the discovered check. The defender only has two really good options here. The computer move will always be that because it's the longest road to mate, and then it starts a forced sequence. Discovered check, walk toward the rook, check, 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 forcing the king into the corner of the board with the rook, and now we've mutated into breaking a corner defense. But if you're playing a human opponent, you may just want to try this sneaky approach where the discovered check actually loses 10 moves. There's no good way to attack the king. The queen can't play to f-1. There is no such square. And essentially what's happened is this is probably going to turn into yet another harassment defense. The rook holding down a cutoff here, the queen eventually landing on this line, and the black king settling down right here. Okay, the first option that the attacker has is to try to maneuver the queen to b5 with check. But there's a second option. We can also check here. King will naturally step forward into the blockading position and then just drop back here and cover the two checking squares. Now if you do that, there's a chance that the attacker will respond this way. Certainly computers will do that, in which case you give check from this square, and now the defender either has to give up the blockade and allow the white king to move to e4 when both checking squares are defended, or else he has to go up here and he's set up the killing position. You can see how this position is forced in a lot of different ways, and as long as you remember to run away with the king, and then in response to this, set up the discovered check, you'll have no problems. But if you like this approach, you also need to be prepared for the defender playing this, switching to the other harassing diagonal. Now what makes this irritating is that the rook is in a harassing position while the black king is maintaining direct opposition, body checking the attacker. The right way for the attacker to handle this is first to give check here, forcing the defender to abandon the body check. Now swing over here and control the two checking squares again. The defender returns here, but now we've brought this checking square under control. The harassment is only partial, and that means that the attacker can adopt a technique that I call walking forward by walking sideways. We'll go over here. If the attacker tries to attack from the side that isn't under control, well, then you just attack the rook that you walk toward, and all of a sudden, this rook has a great deal of trouble reuniting with the king. In fact, it's probably lost to a fork in the next couple of moves. If, on the other hand, the defender checks from this side, this is the walking forward by walking sideways. Now, there are no more checks. The rook has to rejoin the king or go lost, And now you just drop the queen down here and you're in the Öva position, which is an easy win for the attacker. So remember that sequence. If you like this second method for its simplicity, you do give the attacker the defender this option. Bump the king back, then control the checking squares again, and walk forward by walking sideways. Easy win. The second thing you have to know if you use this option is that when you check here, the defender can also walk backward. Don't be confused. Don't think that this is anything different. Do the same thing. The only difference here, in fact, is that the opposition is already broken. Get him into the corner, walk forward by walking sideways. Check here, step forward, Rook F7, Queen C8 check, Queen F1 check, steps forward, and we have a pseudo of a position, which is also covered in the database. Another easy win. Okay, that's a quick lesson on how to break the harassment defense.